My name's Skylar, and I just became Catholic. So I created this channel because I want to share my Catholic faith with other people, especially Protestants and lay Catholics who want to learn more about the Catholic faith. I figured I'd create a little video sharing my conversion story to Christianity and then to Catholicism. And yeah, just give a little bit of background about who I am. So we'll start at the beginning. I grew up with varying degrees of beliefs in agnosticism, militant atheism, even New Age spirituality at some point, all at different times throughout my life. But at 22, my life was really going nowhere pretty fast. I was still living at home with my mom. I had recently had a pretty bad falling out with my high school girlfriend, who I was still living with at the time. She was living with my mother and me. And this whole situation led to a lot of pride issues with me and a lot of anger issues with me. And I made the bad decision to join the Army National Guard. It's not that it's bad to join the Army or to be in the Army National Guard, but for me it was a bad decision at the time because I went into it with the wrong intentions. I thought that it would fix me. I thought that it would make things better. I thought, if I join the Army National Guard, I'll go to training, I'll get away from everybody for a little while. I thought I would go to war. That was the intent. I wanted to regain my masculinity, let go of my anger, or have an outlet for my anger. I thought I was going to go to war. It was 2017, height of the North Korean conflict, and everybody's saying, "Oh, they're going to bomb us. They're going to bomb us." And I thought, for some reason, that was a good idea, that I would just go to war and somehow it would help me. It's very naive, but that's what I did, and I thought it would make me a better candidate to become a police officer. I knew it would, and that's something that I wanted to do since I was 5 years old. Funnily enough, actually, when I was a kid, my mom made me promise to never become two things, a soldier or a cop. And I became the first one with hopes to become the second one. So I put my mom through it quite a bit growing up. But, so at this point, I had no direction or motivation or any positive role models to get me moving toward fulfilling my dreams, to become a cop. Instead, I preferred lazily partying my days away, really with no real responsibilities. And that's kind of where I was when God moved into my life. I woke up one morning hungover, partying the night before. I looked crazy. My hair a mess, mismatched outfit. I was still smoking cigarettes at the time, so I woke up, went out to the back porch to smoke my morning cigarette, and I noticed the park next to our house, there was a bunch of Hispanic people running around and talking and laughing and barbecuing, and they had a bounce house. They had a couple of clowns. There was kids all over the place, and so this piques my interest. I'm looking over there, and this lady approaches the fence between my house and the park, and I walk over and she said, "Hey, can we use your hose to fill up the kiddie pool? Because, it's summer, it's hot out, the kids want to cool down. Could we pay you $10 to use your hose?" I said, "No problem. You don't have to pay me $10. We can just help you fill up the kiddie pool." So I'm getting the hose, I'm feeding it through the fence. I'm talking to her and she goes, "Have you ever been to Casa de Dios around the corner?" That means House of God. It's the name of the church. And I said, "Oh, no, I've never been there because I don't speak Spanish." I lied. I didn't speak Spanish, but that's not why I didn't go to the church. I didn't go to the church because I don't go to church. I'm not a Christian, right? And so I lied, and we're talking and I kind of felt an invitation coming. And so I'm thinking through my head, how am I gonna get out of this? What lie am I gonna tell so that I don't have to go? And And it comes. She invites me, right? And before I can even get a lie out, my mouth is like betraying me. And I accept the invitation. It's like kind of shocks me because like, I don't go to church. What am I doing? Like, I don't do that. I'm not a Christian. What? And, but I did, I accepted. And so I'm like kicking myself in the butt in my head, and I'm thinking, oh, why did I do that? And I go inside. She invites us over to the barbecue too. And so I go inside, I wake up my mom and I say, Mom, get up. We were just invited to a barbecue outside at the park and we're going to church on Sunday. She's like, what? She grew up Christian, but fell away from the church, and won't go into that here. But yeah, so we go to the park, have a great time, eat some food, meet a bunch of great people. And I didn't realize it at the time, but this was an outreach event. The church was going out to the park to try to reach people. And so I went to church that Sunday with my mom, and it was weird. It was, I hadn't been to church since I was a little kid with my great grandmother, and but everybody was so nice and hospitable, warm and welcoming and loving, and they're Hispanic, right? So they like hug and kiss on the cheek and embrace you a lot, and I loved that. I loved like this community that I was entering into. Wasn't into any of the Jesus stuff, but I liked the community, and I thought, man, if I start going here, like I could learn Spanish, which is something I wanted to do for a long time. So I was like, I think I'm going to start I told my mom, I think I'm going to start going to church on Sunday. I could learn Spanish, and I like the people, and there's food, they always cook, and oh man, Hispanic food, and so we started to go, and it was a really selfish reason to begin with. I just wanted to learn Spanish and have food on Sunday, I guess, really. But it doesn't take long. Just a few Sundays later, I start to get bored. I'm like, man, I got to wake up early on Sunday. And I'm a lazy person. I got to wake up early on Sunday and go and do this thing and spend all these hours here at this church. And because, Hispanic church, they go on for hours. And then you spend time downstairs in fellowship, eating and talking. And it just, I grew to love it. But at first, no, And I'm like, Mom, I don't think I want to go to church next Sunday. And, my mom's really starting to like it there. And so she's coming up with all these, ways to try to convince me to go, and nothing's working. And finally she says, she knew I liked one of the girls that went there sometimes. And she says, well, that girl's going to be there this Sunday, because her dad was a pastor, a church planting pastor. And whenever he would visit that church, she would come along with him. And I was like, okay, I'll go this Sunday just to see her. And so I do. I go. Service ends. We all go downstairs to eat and fellowship, and I see her. And so I go up and I talk to her, and she invites me to this college youth group that she goes to on her campus. And I'm like, great, like another opportunity to keep seeing her and talk to her. And so I'm like, yeah, I'll go. I accepted the invitation. And this is when it started to get crazy, because interacting with Christianity so much these last few weeks, naturally questions started to, pop up in my head, and I'm thinking about different things. And so I start going for a few weeks to this youth group, and it seemed like all of the major questions, like whatever I was thinking about the most that week, just like happened to be the topic that they were talking about at youth group that week. And this was happening consistently over and over and over again. And I'm like, this is crazy. Like, how does this keep happening? It was too, like, I was thinking, this is like too much to be a coincidence. This is just weird. So I kept going to church, and I realized that it seemed like there was beginning to be like a split between my heart and my mind. It felt like my heart was saying, like, there's some truth to what we're hearing here. There something is going on. But my mind was going, no, like, I know. I grew up militant atheist, so constantly researching all the arguments against Christianity. And I'm like, no, I know it's just made up nonsense and blah, blah, blah. But I couldn't get that feeling out of my heart. And I was like, okay, maybe I need to do some serious research into this. Because growing up, I had always said, oh, like, I would believe in Christianity if there was just some evidence. If there was just one piece of good evidence, like, I would become a Christian. Obviously, I said that very dishonestly, because if that were true, then I would actually seek out the evidence for Christianity just to evaluate it, honestly, right? But I never did that. I only ever looked up arguments against it. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do this for real this time. Unbiased. I'm just going to look at the evidence, the arguments for both sides. And I did. I started intensely researching. It was consuming like almost every waking moment of my days. And I was reading books. I was watching debates. I was consuming tons of, apologetic, historical, scientific, theological content online, all this stuff. And what I found blew my mind. I had no idea how much evidence there was for Christianity, how many amazing arguments there were for Christianity. And I began to feel, to quote the title of the book, like I no longer had enough faith to be an atheist. It seemed like it required more faith to be an atheist than the faith required to be a believing Christian. And ultimately what did it really was what really sealed it was the resurrection. How is the tomb empty? The best explanation that accounts for all of the data, and I won't go into all of it here. The best explanation that accounts for all of the data, the simplest explanation, the best explanation is that Christ resurrected. And that was it. I mean, I had decided before this, I said, if the evidence isn't there, then I'm going to make my heart submit to my intellect. If the evidence is there, then I'm going to make my intellect submit to my heart. And what happened is I had to make my intellect submit to my heart because the evidence was just too strong. So this led to a radical transformation in my life. I mean, almost instantly, like overnight, like the flip of a light switch, my life spun around, like just completely different person. I went from not being a Christian at all and not living a Christian life at all to going, okay, well, I now believe that the Bible is the actual word of God. Not only do I believe that there is a God, but I believe that the Bible is his words, or are his words. And I took that very seriously, like from day one. And I realized that my party lifestyle and my promiscuity was not okay. And I realized, like, I'm not strong enough to resist the temptations that come along with my friends. And so I did what Jesus said, if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. So I did, cold turkey. I mean, I didn't even say goodbye. And that was painful for my friends because it was just like one day talking to them, partying with them, hanging out with them, the next day completely out of their lives. And it wasn't really painful for me probably because I didn't really take the time to sit there and think about it and work through it. Not as a coping mechanism, but just because I was so immersed in this new life that it was all consuming. God was all consuming, and it was beautiful, and my life was getting better, and it was so amazing. I mean, I was finally content. And God showed me through these new Christian friends that I was making, and through this new Christian life, just what I was capable of, how much I had been holding myself back, how much my friends and my lifestyle had been limiting me. So I became very involved in my church. I mean, I was getting involved in almost every single ministry that they had. I was, driving the church van. I was getting up in the morning, walking to the church on Sundays, driving the van to different people's houses, picking them up, bringing them back to the church, then spending all day at church, and then finally dropping everybody off back home in the church van. And I was studying furiously 24/7 the Bible, just reading the Bible and learning about theology. And it was like consumed my life, almost every waking moment. And I was surpassing lifelong Christians, lay Christians, in pure knowledge of theology and the scriptures. Definitely not in spirituality. They were much more spiritually advanced than me. But in terms of knowledge, I was advancing very quickly. I mean, to the point where they were coming up to me and asking me questions about the Bible, about prayer, about, theology in general. And I mean, my life radically changed. And one day, the pastor and I were sitting in the church van, and he looks over at me and he says, "Skylar, I think God is calling you to ministry in some way." And I was like, and he says, "No, I think, I don't know if it's to be a pastor or to be a missionary or a church planter or a prophet." And I was like, whoa, I'm thinking, this is kind of crazy. No, I'm thinking I'm going to be a cop. I didn't say any of this. I was very politely like, smiling, nodding my head, maybe, but I'm like, no. But eventually I started to think maybe he was right. Maybe God did have a plan for me to get involved in ministry in some way. And so I started to take that idea seriously. But as soon as I did that, I started to think, well, what denomination am I going to be? Because I wasn't Methodist. It just happened to be the church that God used to bring me into the faith. And I wasn't Catholic, definitely, because while I was militant atheist, not only was I anti-Christian, but I was even more anti-Catholic. And, as an American, my default is Protestantism. And, I thought the Catholic Church was like the epitome of the man-made Christianity, the version of Christianity that succeeded most in being created to oppress people and to control people and to give them, fancy ideas and stories that they can hold on to, fantastical ideas and stories. And I wasn't even aware of Eastern Orthodoxy at the time, so that wasn't on my radar at all. But I remember thinking, my denomination is going to determine everything: who I get married to, how I raise my kids, what ministry I'm going to get involved in, right? So again, I started researching furiously, which is, I guess, my nature. I get kind of locked in on something and I dig super deep into it and I try to learn everything that I can. And I decided I wanted to find the denomination that was closest to the earliest Christians, to the earliest Christianity, to the apostolic faith. So I was looking at all the different Protestant denominations, didn't like Calvinism because of double predestination, I didn't think that was biblical. Going through, can't really find anything. And one day I stumble upon a video by Pastor Brian Wolfmueller, who's a Lutheran Church Missouri Synod pastor. And it's like a 3-minute long video on just a basic explanation of like the gospel and justification from a Lutheran perspective. How are you saved? And I remember I started watching it, like just the first few seconds of it, and I thought that he was explaining like a Calvinist idea. I thought he was doing double predestination, but it's actually divine monergism, which is different, and I won't get into that here. So I like quickly exited out of the video, and I was like, nope, I'm not a Calvinist, so I guess I'm not a Lutheran, which is hilarious. Like, if you know the history between Luther and Calvin, like, that's hilarious, but I didn't at the time. And so, yeah, I clicked out of that video, and I just kept looking. And over the next few days and weeks, I noticed that all of these Lutheran videos were popping up into my recommendations. Because God wanted to take me on a journey. He was bringing me somewhere. But I'm ignoring it. I'm like, gosh, I click on one stupid Lutheran video, and now my recommendations are just flooded with these Lutheran videos. And it's annoying. And one day I see that same video pop up that I had watched a few seconds of and clicked out of. And I knew it was the same video because that has that little red bar at the bottom to indicate that like you watched part of the video. And so I'm like, as soon as I saw that, I was like, all right, God, like I get it. I relent. I'll watch the video. I'll do it. And so I did. I clicked on it and I gave it the full go. I watched the whole thing. Let him talk, and I just listened, and I realized, oh, this isn't Calvinism or double predestination at all. And so I started. It was actually really interesting, this idea from the Lutheran perspective, how a person is saved. So I started to watch tons of Lutheran videos and do tons of research on Lutheranism, and I found out that Luther was the original Protestant. He was and at this point, I had no idea about these things. I was just studying the Bible and theology and apologetics, and I was like, wow, like this is the original Protestantism. This is the guy who tried to leave that man-made Catholic Church and go as close as he could back to the original Christianity. Wow, that really interested me. I really liked that idea. And so I started to look into all of Lutheran theology, and I became convinced of the idea that baptism saves, for example, that we should baptize babies, that Christ is truly present in Holy Communion, the Eucharist, right? And I loved how this was apostolic, and this is so scripture-based. And so, to just kind of summarize for the sake of brevity, I became I was like, or not Catholic. I'm going to become Lutheran. And so I did. I decided that's the church, that's the denomination, And so I was like, okay, if I'm doing this, then I need to get educated formally. I can't just say, oh, well, I've read tons of books. Trust me. I've watched tons of videos. Trust me. No, nobody's going to trust you if you just do that. So I'm going to get an education, I decided. So I found a good college, good Lutheran college, LCMS, Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. They have a system of colleges called the Concordia system. So Concordia University, whatever, wherever they are. And I found the one in Wisconsin, CUW, had the best pre-seminary program, the best theology program out of all the Concordias. So as far as I was concerned, that was the best theology program in the United States, because Lutherans are the best, of course, and that's the best theology. So I decided I was going to go there. And I did. I joined the pre-seminary program, which is just studies that prepare you to go to seminary. And at this point, I still hated Catholicism. And I was arguing, as soon as I got there, I found Catholics and I was arguing furiously with them. And I was very unloving, honestly. I was kind of a jerk. And my pre-seminary brothers corrected me. They said, listen, we're Lutheran. Like, we love the Catholics. We never wanted to split from them. We want unity. Luther's idea was never to stop being Catholic. It was to reform the Catholic Church. And I was like, wow, that's pretty interesting. I like that idea, but I was super proud to be Lutheran. I thought Lutheranism was the best. And a lot of my other Lutheran friends thought the same thing. We were very proud. And I found friends in my anti-Catholicism within Lutheranism. And so it was pretty easy to just keep on keeping on, being a jerk to Catholics. And eventually I made some Catholic friends, and I had to soften up on Catholicism because, I mean, they would hate me, right? And I wanted to be their friends. Now, this didn't stop me at all from reading tons of books and creating tons of playlists that I was going to share with my Catholic friends to try to convince them that their religion was corrupt and man-made. Of course, I was going to keep doing that, but in a more loving way. More loving, not completely loving. I was still learning. So this was 2020, and spring break 2023 rolls around. You know, I am a junior at this point, and I'm on campus alone. All my roommates left, all my friends left, my girlfriend left for spring break, and I'm home because I didn't have enough money to, or I'm in the dorm, I didn't have enough money to travel home. And I'm scrolling through YouTube, just doing my thing, researching, reading books, you know, stuff like that. And I stumble across a video of my Lutheran pastor, because at this point I had already gone back to New York a couple of times and found a Lutheran church. My pastor is Dr. Jordan Cooper. You might have seen his videos on YouTube. I think he's the most subscribed to Lutheran content creator, somewhere between 50, 60, or 40, 50, 60,000 subscribers, something like that. And it was a debate between him and like the senior apologist at Catholic Answers, Jimmy Akin, very well known. And I was like, whoa, that's cool. Like, my pastor is doing a debate with this really popular guy. That's so cool. So and it's on justification. The debate is on justification, you know, how we're saved, basically. So I click on the video, obviously, 2-hour long video, watch the whole thing. And by the end of it, I'm blown away because even as the two debaters, Jimmy and Pastor Cooper, pointed out in their debate, the doctrines of justification between Catholicism and Lutheranism are substantively, right, the substance, the essence of what they believe, like strikingly similar, but they're articulated very, very differently. And this leads to confusion, and it leads many people to believe that Catholicism is a works-based religion, for example, which was acknowledged in the debate that that's not the case, right? Because Dr. Cooper is, of course, a very learned scholar and theologian, and so he knows better. And this blew my mind because I thought Catholicism was works-based. I thought we were leagues apart, completely different ideas of justification. Now, don't get me wrong. There are definitely strong differences, I would say, between the two. But by and large, they are radically similar. So this blew a hole right through my thinking. And I was like, okay, I thought I knew so much about Catholicism, but clearly I don't. So I need to stop researching Catholicism and learning about Catholicism from Protestants. I need to start learning about Catholicism from Catholics. A novel idea, I know, but of course, like, that is the best way to do things. If you want to learn about something, you learn about that idea from its source, from the people who believe the idea, not from other people, at least initially. You want to learn about the idea from the people themselves, or at some point throughout your research. Otherwise, you're going to straw man their ideas. And a straw man is when you basically, to summarize it in a simple way, it's like you get an idea wrong, and then you attack that wrong version of the idea, which isn't the idea that the person actually believes in. It's a straw man. So, that week, that spring break, I started investigating Catholicism in a whole new light, in a way that I'd never done it before. Learning from Catholics, Catholic theologians, Catholic apologists. I read like 3 or 4 books on like the papacy, justification, Mary, so on. And I watched, it consumed me because I'm obsessive, because that's just the type of person that I am. And I, again, in my normal fashion, watched countless hours of content and reading books and I was blown away. It at that point, that planted the seeds where it was rocking my world. It was shaking my Lutheran faith. And that semester, I was taking a class on the Book of Revelation in honor of my grandmother, because she had recently passed away. And while she was still with us, she loved us to read the Book of Revelation to her, because it was exciting and interesting and mysterious, right? And so I took a class on Revelation in her honor, and spring break ends, we come back to classes. At that point, we're about halfway through the Book of Revelation, and we start to read Revelation chapter 12. The woman clothed in the sun, with a crown of 12 stars and the moon under her feet. She's covered with the radiance of the sun, and she's pregnant with the Messiah and giving birth to the Messiah. And the Messiah is birthed, and he's caught up to the throne, to the right hand of God, to the throne. And I'm like, whoa, pregnant with the Messiah, a woman, like that's, I raise my hand. I go, is that Mary? And my professor, who's a Lutheran pastor, goes, yeah, that's the generally accepted interpretation. It's symbolic of Israel, it's symbolic of the church, and symbolic of Mary. Yeah, that's the typical interpretation. And I was like, what? This, because I'd read this passage before, but it never, I had blinders on. It never really meant too much to me. I never thought about it as Mary before, and I needed to know what the Catholics thought about this, because like Mary's Catholic, right? Like Mary is super Catholic. To talk about Mary, to think about Mary, right? That's Catholic. And which isn't exactly true. There's tons of Marian piety within certain groups of Catholicism, or Lutheranism. I'm gonna keep doing that. But anyways, so I had to learn, what do the Catholics think about this? So I did. I started to look into it, and I learned all about the world of typologies in Catholicism. And a typology, really quick, is basically when something in the Old Testament, generally in the Old Testament, prefigure something in the New Testament, or always in the Old Testament, prefiguring something generally in the New Testament. So for example, you have Adam is a type of Jesus Christ, right? So I started to discover all these different ideas of typologies within Catholicism. And this led me to discover the typological argument for like the papacy, for example, which originally I thought the papacy was just based on a weak argument from just one verse. In Matthew 16:18, it says, "And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it." And that's all. I thought, that's all the Catholics have. That's really weak. It's just one verse. Like, how can you get a whole doctrine of the papacy out of just one verse, But these typologies started to make me wonder if I was certain that Catholicism was wrong, because all these typological arguments were, really powerful to me. They were really moving to me. And so I continued to study and discuss my concerns with, learned and intelligent Lutherans. But nobody could answer my questions. That a lot of them were unintentionally straw manning the arguments that Catholics had, and I knew, because I had been studying so much about Catholicism at this point, that I knew Catholic theology better than them, even though I was Lutheran. And I was like, these people are just confused, and they're not actually answering the arguments. And, for example, I went to one of my professors once and I said, hey, do you think that Catholics have a works-based salvation? And he goes, oh, yes, very, very certainly. They have, a works-based idea of salvation, and I was like, man, I read that part of their catechism, and I've been studying their theologians, and it seems like they don't believe that. And he goes, no, they do. They certainly do. And, this was sowing seeds of like mistrust in these, what I at one point held as very strong authorities. But I knew that they were getting very basic Catholic theology very, very wrong. And so how could I continue to trust them? And, so I started to study these ideas of like sola scriptura versus the idea of like sacred scripture and sacred tradition in Catholicism. And I started to develop a huge problem with sola scriptura and the Protestant canon of the Bible. Protestants only have 66 books in the Bible because during the Reformation, they took out some of the seven of the Old Testament books that Christians had for the first 1,500 years of Christianity. And then the additions to, I believe, Daniel and Esther, right? And so I was and I couldn't reconcile this idea of sola scriptura with certain biblical passages, like, for example, 2 Thessalonians 2:15 or 1 Timothy 3:14-15. 2 Thessalonians 2:15 says, so then, brethren, stand firm and hold to the traditions which you were taught by us, either by word of mouth or by letter. Word of mouth. Christians are supposed to hold fast to traditions that the apostles handed down to them that were never written down, at least in that time, that were just passed on by word of mouth. Well, they couldn't have written all of them down, right? Certainly not. Just one church would have had an apostle sometimes for years. You think that they wrote every authoritative thing that the apostle ever said to them? No. All of the apostles too, and all of the places they visited? Certainly not. So that was difficult for me, And 1 Timothy 3:14-15 says, I hope to come to you soon. This is Paul writing to Timothy. But I am writing these instructions to you so that if I am delayed, you may know how one ought to behave in the household of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and bulwark of the truth. For me as a Lutheran, the scriptures were the pillar and bulwark of the truth, not the church. But Paul's saying right here, the church of the living God is the pillar and bulwark of the truth. Yeah, these verses and all these other arguments that I was hearing from history and philosophy in general, by the way, because how do you believe that, for example, from this is what I was thinking at the time, like, how can I believe that in a form of like, this is going to sound weird, but like deistic theism, right? Like deism is the idea that like God, there's a God, he just kind of like wound up creation, kind of like winding up a clock, and then just kind of let it go and let it do its thing, and he doesn't interact with it. Theism is the idea that God created and then interacts, right? But then Protestantism is kind of like deism, kind of, with the church, that God kind of just created the church and then let it go. He doesn't still run it or operate it or control it or guide it into all truth. He just kind of let it go, and now it's doing its thing. And men have to come 1,500 years later after the creation of his church, the perfect church that he created, because everything God creates is perfect. And then they have to reform it. They have to correct it. They have to correct God's work because he's not involved. This is too difficult for me. I was convinced that many Catholic arguments were really solid, and if I wasn't going to be swayed into becoming a Catholic, then they needed to be refuted. But no one could refute them without straw men. And my roommate, he was telling me, his brother is a PhD student at Marquette, I believe in Marquette, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And he said, yeah, my brother, he's obviously Lutheran, right? Lutheran pastor even is their father. So he's a PhD student in philosophy, and he says, yeah, at Marquette, my brother interacts with a lot of Catholics, and he kind of went through what you're going through right now. But, he came out on the other end a resolute Lutheran. Like, he was very certain about Lutheranism. And he was like, I could connect you with him and you guys could talk. And I said, that would be great, because I'm not finding any arguments that are convincing here. And it seems like everybody I talk to is very confused about Catholicism. And so that's what we did. He connected me with his brother. And what he said basically was, there's not a lot of high-level academic Protestants working on Catholic theology, so that there really aren't a lot of good Protestant refutations or answers for Catholic ideas, because they're just not doing it, because there's not enough people to do it. And he said, basically, you have to come to the conclusion yourself. You have to be solid in your Lutheran faith. And, and he said all these other things. But I just felt like, okay, you were raised Lutheran. Your family's Lutheran. Your dad's a Lutheran pastor. You have a lot to lose, I think, in that respect. And then also, I had grown to like Catholics and like elements of Catholic theology, and I'd become at least sympathetic to Catholic theology. And he was very abrasive and uncharitable when discussing Catholicism in a way that, even though I wasn't Catholic, it felt like it was hurting me when he was saying these things. And so I just stopped talking to him, because really, at the end of the day, his advice was, you're not going to find answers. You have to philosophically disagree with the way Catholics think and the way Catholics interpret Scripture. And if you do that, then you'll just remain Lutheran. And I didn't see the arguments for that. So ultimately, I decided that since no one could refute the most important argument, which is certainly the argument for the papacy, right? Just like Christianity stands or falls on whether or not Christ was resurrected, Catholicism stands or falls on whether or not Christ created the papal office, the office of the papacy, to be the head of the church on earth. So since they couldn't, I decided, I have to become Catholic. I have to become Catholic. That's what I have to do if I'm going to be intellectually honest, Even though I didn't fully understand all of the things that Catholicism taught, or even why they were taught, I recognize that if it's true that Christ created the papacy himself, and that it's guided, and that the church is guided, the magisterium is guided by the Holy Spirit into all truth, the way that Christ promised the apostles it would be, then just as how I don't need to understand everything that the Bible teaches in order to believe the Bible and live it, to believe it and live it, then the same was true for the Catholic Church and its authority. So on this Easter Vigil, I decided to join the Catholic Church, and that's what I did. And thank you for listening, staying this long. over 40 minutes. I hope to create more content to share the Catholic faith in love with Protestants and with lay Catholics, so that we can communicate and we can dialogue and we can understand each other better, in fairness and in truth and in love. So, like I said, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you around.